Okay, so for this video, we'll talk about the role of sports tourism and sustainable development. So just so you know, the sports tourism has been suggested by both the World Tourism Organization and the International Olympic Committee. They believe that sports and tourism could work hand in hand to be able to help each other flourish and to be able to help nations increase their developmental capacity. So, UN levels na to, no? So, United Nations level na ang sports tourism, no? Talagang sinusuportahan ito because they believe that sports tourism could contribute to the development of a state and the world in general. So, WTO and IOC agrees that sports tourism should promote growth and development on a worldwide scale. And generally, they work together to understand peace among the peoples in the world. So, a certain conference that was done in the 1990s in relation to the World Tourism Organization and IOC for sports tourism, they tried to contextualize how development and sports tourism could be put together. So generally, the diagram here basically shows us the conceptualization or the paradigm that really sports tourism has something to do with the development of a state. So basically, sports and tourism, they both contribute to the development of a state. So this diagram suggests that sports tourism contributes to the development of a state. And basically, this development fosters the local identity of the people in that state. And we've seen this before, how Filipinos get to bond together and unite as one while they rally behind athletes, no? And a good example for this is Manny Pacquiao, no? It's so nice to see the Filipinos cheering for him every time he has a boxing match. I mean, he's a problematic politician, and of course that cannot be separated from his sports athlete identity. But generally, it's one way for Filipinos to love being a Filipino more. To know that there are athletes that we can rally behind and can represent us in a larger scale. And, you know, other people like Carlos Yulo, Hidilin, and those who qualified for the World Olympics, the Dragon Boat team, the Azkals, no? So this basically promotes our local identity. And of course, generally, tourism, not just sport, also improves our local identity as well. Makes us proud of our culture, makes us proud of our heritage, makes us proud of our peoples. And being able to have that, you know, increased self-realization of our capacities as human beings, through sport and tourism, we can achieve peace and prosperity. On the other hand, sports and tourism can also, as it contributes to the development, can also foster a global village, meaning a general identity shared among all humans all over the world. And sport is like that, right? We may not be speaking the same language, but when you put different countries who speak different languages into the basketball court, they all know what to do. They can communicate already by the way they move. And sport is also considered as a universal language. It's a universal symbol that people can get together too. And because it fosters understanding between peoples, we get to see more similarities than differences in the way we move. You know, even there's competition in a sports event. Then it also increases, our oneness with the rest of the world, diba? Kaya nga yun ang ating slogan, diba? We win as one, diba? In the ASEAN, because that is what we want to foster, understanding between peoples. And we've seen that among Filipinos as well, especially si East Timor, hindi siya nakakuha ng mga marami ng medals, and the Filipinos are rallying behind East Timor because they want, East Timor to bring home medals, and the Philippines were so happy when the East Timor people were able to get the medal. So that's an example of, peace and prosperity that could be displayed through sport. And WTO and International Olympics Committee, they were able to underscore and identify the different stakeholders of sports. Siyempre, the number one is the athletes because they are the ones who are engaged in sport, and then we have politics and public institutions. So, it takes some governance and willpower, political willpower to be able to make sports tourism work, especially for mega events like Olympics and regional games. Next, of course, the crowds that watch, the spectacle of sport. Siyempre, sila yung magbabayad, diba? Sila yung pupunta, sila yung magsusuporta, sila yung bibigay ng moral support. So, they're also stakeholders of sports. Next, we have the associations and the clubs, right, of sports who also are busy and engaged in terms of ironing out the general policies and procedures in a given sport and how to make it fair for everyone across the world. Different industries also, the suppliers that, create the materials needed for a certain sport. Of course, the suppliers needed to create other tourism-related products like food, accommodation, souvenirs, ganyan. And of course, the media is also very important for marketing and also to be able to disseminate the information happening in a sporting event. And of course, everything is very much contributed to by technology and innovative forces. Now, let's talk about how sports tourism could help achieve some of the sustainable development goals. Diba? We have 17 sustainable development goals. And United Nations and World Tourism Organization in their website identified that there are certain sustainable development goals that could be achieved by sports tourism. So, the first set of SDGs are SDG number 1, no poverty, and SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth. So, sports tourism can give job and income opportunities. I mean, naging problematic lang sa SEA Games kasi puro volunteer work ang pinagawa nila. Pero in an ideal setup, of course, mega sporting events and, putting up regular sporting activity sites and other sporting related destination can increase jobs as, tourism would in general if we've learned that in economic benefit. And of course, for sports tourism, the tourist would be compelled to do some sort of visitor spending, tourism expenditure. And of course, the visitor spending will be contributing to the overall economy, not just by the local area where the sports tourism is happening, but also generally the whole country. And of course, it fosters competitiveness. And as we all know, the spirit of competitiveness in a very capitalist society as we have now is a very important value that needs to be inculcated by populations and is displayed through the spectacle of sport where there's a lot of competition. So these are some of the ways that sports tourism can contribute to SDG number 1 and SDG number 8. Next, we have SDG number 3, good health and well-being. So, syempre, in the sports tourism, we take care of the well-being of tourists, especially the tourists who go to a certain sports destination for purposes of engaging in a sporting activity such as marathons or such as dragon boat and canoeing and skiing, diba? So, of course, their engagement in sports will be able to increase their fitness, physical fitness. And of course, the generated income from the tourism expenditure that goes to the locality where the tourism is spent will contribute generally to the whole budget of the locality, and some of those budget will go to the health services of the locals. So, that's how it would indirectly affect the health and well-being of the locals where the sports attraction is placed. Next, it is also understood that sports tourism also promotes gender equality, SDG number 5. So, just like it would provide job and income opportunities for everyone, but also the job and income opportunities will also be open for women, diba? And of course, women athletes have always been, good role models for girls and women everywhere to be more competitive, to know that they have opportunities in sport and in life in general. And that promotes female empowerment. Next, we have number 10, reduced inequalities. And 11, sustainable cities and communities. So, very important, di ba? Related to sports events, you have to build some sort of infrastructure where the space of the sport will be held, right? And that will help in terms of, building the infrastructure and the cities and the communities where the sports attraction will be held. But also, it will also be able to accommodate yung accessibility, no? Especially if your country is hosting Paralympics, wherein those who have physical disabilities would be able to engage in certain sports. So of course, increased sports activity will provide, accessibility to sports products, especially to communities that don't have access to sports products, accommodation for those who don't have access to accommodation, especially when they're provided with budget, and then of course transport for people with disability, for those who wants to watch, no? Kasi ideally, di ba, dapat when we create infrastructure, any infrastructure na tourism or sports infrastructure, dapat disability friendly din siya. At the same time, yun na nga, if the event is a Paralympics event, di ba? So it also is a possibility to be able to build infrastructures that are disability friendly. So in this video, we were able to see how World Tourism Organization and the International Olympic Committee got together in order to, solidify the concept of sports tourism and relate it with development of the societies, and how it contributes to overall peace and prosperities among nations. And we also talked about the different stakeholders of sports tourism. And finally, we talked about how could sports tourism address the different sustainable development goals by the United Nations.